President Obama has released over a dozen executive actions on the topic, and currently there's debate in the House and the Senate on an assault weapons ban treaty, as well as other things. We'll be talking about all of that in the next hour. I have sitting here with me Madeline Krautsak on my right. She's a senior psych major. And on my left, Carolyn Thornton, a freshman chemistry major. We'll be tackling all the issues related to guns and gun rights. Thank you guys both for being here. So let's start with sort of a basic sort of opening statements from both of you guys. So no, we'll have Carolyn go first, and then Maddie, you can follow.
One of the inalienable rights that we possess as American citizens is the right to bear arms. It's deeply ingrained in our society and in many facets of our culture. The ability to own a gun is what distinguishes Americans from many other parts of the world, the ability to defend yourself and use guns in a recreational activity. It's really important to some people that they are able to possess guns.
Okay. And Madeline?
I grew up with one foot in the city and another foot in the country, so I have kind of a varied opinion on gun control. I think one issue that a lot of people have with this is they view it as a categorical subject where either we can have guns or we can't have guns, and that's not the case. It's a spectrum. And I think right now we're leaning towards the wrong end of the spectrum. I think that more regulation is not a bad thing, and I do not think that complete elimination of guns is a viable option at this point. So there has to be some kind of compromise in the middle.
Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about as we move forward with guns is sort of the prevalence of guns in American society. Right now, there are 88.8 firearms for every 100 people in America. That's a lot of guns per 100 people. However, it is actually the highest gun ownership in the world of any country in the world. Private gun ownership, I should say. However, more than 50% of Americans do not own guns. So that means the guns that are there are very heavily concentrated in homes. So that would mean that most homes have more than one gun, if they have a gun at all. So there comes a question, I think, as to why is it that America has this sort of this large amount of guns concentrated in its borders? Does it go back to early American history with the American Revolution? Is it because of the Second Amendment, because we have the right to do it, we have more guns? Is it because of our hunting culture? Obviously, there's a hunting culture in America. A mistrust of authority that's sort of basic to America, or can we blame it on the media sensationalism? So I'd like both of your thoughts on that. We'll start with Madeline this time.
Okay. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think an important differentiation to make in that data that, I mean, people don't really collect on is the difference between recreational guns and protective weapons, because I think that's a very different perspective to take on this. Because if people are hunting, then they're going to have like 5 or 6 guns, probably, and that's going to skew the scales. I think the reason that we have so many firearms in this country is because of its roots in our history and its entrenchment in our culture. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does warrant for more regulation than otherwise.
So now you say entrenchment in our culture. Mm-hmm. Why do you think why is it so entrenched in our culture?
Well, I mean, from the roots in the writings from our forefathers, the right to bear arms has been there from the beginning, and just the nature of our country in its beginnings. We came here, we have a lot of space for hunting and recreational gun use. We have had very laissez-faire policies in the past concerning guns, and I would say that the distrust of authority is a prominent factor as well.
Okay.
Because, I mean, you talk about taking people's guns away and they start talking about a military state, so it's a very reactive subject.
All right, Carolyn?
Yeah, I would agree on it being a very reactive subject because, like Madeline said, when you say, oh, they're going to take our guns away, people start saying, well, from my cold, dead hands. Because it's a comfort thing. Like, you have the ability to defend yourself in your own home, and there's a sort of slippery slope argument that comes out when people think that that ability is going to be taken away from them. Also, it's so deeply ingrained in our culture to the fact where, like, young children will receive a BB gun as a present, and they'll learn how to shoot from an early age because they learn how to shoot as a sport. Also, like, in Boy Scouts, for example, riflery and skeet shooting are 2 of the skills you can take at most Boy Scout camps. you learn how to do them as a young child, and it seems commonplace to you when you get older. It's a right that you've always had.
Hmm. So let's go back to that sort of cold, dead hands argument you were talking about. What is it, I mean, you characterized it as a fear. What is it that people are afraid will happen if the government takes away their guns?
People are afraid that they will not be able to defend their rights. It's almost kind of like a pre-Civil War kind of hinge to it, because it's like, we have this right. If they take it away, they'll take away all of our rights, and then we will have no rights, and we'll be living in a totalitarian dictatorship. It's a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's a logical fear?
Not really, because first off, what are you and your handgun going to do against the United States military? If they wanted to take over the country, they could.
Mm-hmm.
And second off, I don't think restrictions on guns would ever get to the point where no citizens would have any guns of any sort. They would just have guns with less potential for mass murder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. But you are in favor of gun rights,
yes.
Correct? So if taking them away, it's not a logical fear that we're going to return to a totalitarian state,
Yeah.
then what is the danger of taking them away? Because clearly you think there is one.
I think the danger would be stigmatism against people that own guns. Like, oh, they own guns, they must be a homicidal maniac. People are afraid that they will be judged by their peers for the fact that they own guns.
Okay. So let's move on to, I think, one of the things that's sort of related to this, which is Second Amendment rights. The Second Amendment, let me read it here. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is the exact wording of the Second Amendment. Now, throughout the Second Amendment history, the meaning has changed. And I should say actually recently in the Second Amendment history. It was originally seen as a collective right, as in we the people have the right to bear arms for the purpose of a military, having a strong military, which the United States has been known for. So it's seen as a sort of collective right that we as a country have the right to have this strong military. And that was seen in rulings by the Supreme Court throughout the 1900s on this topic. Now, the NRA, which was formed in 1871, did not become a large sort of lobbying group till the mid-1900s. And in the 1970s, a small group of the NRA began to, with conservative thinkers, discuss the possibility that the Second Amendment was actually meant for individual rights, that individual private people had the right to own a weapon. And this sort of became the prevailing ideology of the NRA, and as we got more conservative justices on the Supreme Court in recent years, became the Supreme Court's view as well. D.C. v. Heller, which was in 2009, gave Second Amendment individual rights to private citizens for the first time in any Supreme Court case. So let's talk about this. Maddie, does the Second Amendment specify that individual private citizens have the right to bear arms?
Well, I mean, obviously the wording of the Second Amendment was left pretty loose, and I think that was on purpose. So I think there was some room for interpretation where private citizens could be granted the right to bear arms based on that wording. That's kind of the best part of the Constitution and the worst part of the Constitution, because everything is so widely defined. You can't really tell what it covers and what it doesn't cover when you go to fine-tune it. I think that's a reasonable explanation, though.
Okay. So if you're a justice in the Supreme Court in a case about the Second Amendment, do you rule that there is an individual right to bear arms?
I do.
Okay. All right. What about you, Carolyn?
I would rule that there is an individual right to bear arms. It's our ability to possess something that could be dangerous, but it's kind of, faith in ourselves. Guns can be weapons for murder, but they can also be tools for something else. The Constitution gives us that right to make our own decisions.
What else can guns be a tool for besides killing?
Recreation, shooting, like a recreational sport for some people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But hunting would involve killing as well, right?
Yeah.
So is there, I guess what I'm asking is, when people sort of say guns are a hobby of theirs, Um, a gun's sole purpose is to maim and kill.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So does that not make it different then from, say, a golf club or, what's another recreational thing that, a baseball bat? Yes. They could be used as weapons, but they have another purpose. A gun, I don't see it as having another purpose. Would you repeat that?
I could see your point that yes, guns are mainly designed as weapons to maim and kill, but I don't know. It's important for some people to be able to have that ability, either to defend themselves or to just use it recreationally. But I can see where you come from on that point.
Okay. Now let's talk about, you both said that you would rule that the Second Amendment is an individual right. There is an individual right to bear arms in the Second Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
Why include, the first part of the Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, and then the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Why include that first part about a well-regulated militia if the sole purpose of the Second Amendment was to allow individual rights to bear arms?
Well, I don't think that was its sole purpose. I think that was an important differentiation to make because, I mean, at the time that these amendments were being written, the militia wasn't well regulated. There were a lot of Minutemen and people in their individual communities protecting themselves from the elements, basically. So I think the well-regulated militia part of that was important because obviously it laid the ground for our current military. But I think it was intentionally worded looser in the second part.
Yeah. So I know we do have to go to a commercial break, but before we go, I just want to sort of really hone in on that point, though. Is an individual a well-regulated militia? Do they have to be, based on the wording of the Second Amendment? I'll give Carolyn the last word, and then we'll go ahead to commercial break.
I don't think the individual themselves needs to be a well-regulated militia. I think based on the wording and possible interpretations, you can say that there needs to exist a well-regulated militia to protect the people, and then the people themselves can protect themselves in a more personal sense with their ability to possess firearms.
Okay, so you would argue there's an individual and collective right within the Second
The
Amendment.
militia protects the state, the individual protects the individual.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll start talking about gun licenses, as well as why do people need and want guns, and things that can be done to regulate them. We'll be right back here on The Third Degree on GSTV. Hello, welcome back to The Third Degree. I'm Sam White. We're talking today about guns, gun violence, gun control, and gun rights. So we just got done talking about the Second Amendment. What we're going to talk about now is gun licenses and how difficult guns are to obtain in the United States. And a lot of, and actually we had our analyst here, Amanda, take a look into that for us. So we'll go to Amanda right now. Amanda, how difficult is it to get a gun in the United States?
Not that difficult. More specifically in New York, it's very simple. You do need to, there's a fee of around $350. However, you go to, for example, the NYPD, you fill out an application, you have to be there in person. Estimated time on the website said about 45 minutes. So obviously, you'll need to provide background, licenses, but it's nothing to the extent of, let's say, in the UK, where it's a very long, drawn-out, extensive process.
Yeah, how long would it take, would you say, to get a gun in the UK?
Weeks, close to months, maybe.
Okay.
They do a lot of background checks on personal history, especially with criminal records, mental records, just to make sure you are fit enough to carry a gun, because barely anyone in the UK does possess guns. The police don't even obtain them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amanda.
Of course.
So, clearly, very easy in the United States to get a gun. Either one. Jump in.
I think that is possibly the biggest problem with our gun regulation right now. It is extremely troubling how easy it is to get a gun. I read an article last week, actually, about someone talking about this. He said in order to get a cosmetology license, he had to complete 2,000 hours of supervised practice. And that's just to put hair color on someone's hair. There's no risk of death inside the realm of probable possibilities. But in order to get a gun, you go to a police station for 45 minutes, give them your license and your fingerprints, and if you check out, you get a license for a lethal weapon in a matter of days. I think, and another point, a lot of this is regulated at the level of the county instead of the federal level. I think that is a mistake. I think there need to be federal regulations like there are for drinking and other potentially lethal situations. I think it's ridiculous, honestly, the level that regulations are lacking.
All right, Carolyn, what are your thoughts?
I wouldn't say it's ridiculous, the ease that one can acquire a gun legally. I would say that what is ridiculous is how easy it is to acquire one illegally, because a good part of the murders that occur involving firearms happen because someone has illegally obtained a firearm that they either shouldn't have because they're already have been convicted, or they're not of a sound enough mental state to possess one.
So when you say illegally purchased a firearm, what are we talking about here? You're talking about people who have purchased one from a gun store still, correct?
Well, in some cases they've purchased them from gun stores because they can have someone who is able to purchase a gun go in with them and buy them the gun and then just give it to them outside, which is what happened with the Webster shooting. A woman purchased firearms and then gave them to the shooter who was unable to purchase firearms because he had already been convicted of a felony. So
wouldn't stricter regulations cut down on that type of thing?
Yeah, but it's more than just that too, because that's a problem, and also the guns that have been stolen from people's homes and have been resold to other people is also a problem.
Well, but how big a problem is that in comparison to, I mean, we're talking about 88.8 firearms per 100 people. And actually, I have some more stats here. There was a study done in high gun states and low gun states, is what they call them. It meant states where there's a high prevalence of guns and states where there are a low prevalence of guns. In states where there are a high prevalence of guns, homicide deaths with guns, legal guns, were 15,283. In low gun states, that number, and they both had about the same population, 3,668. When we're talking about non-gun related homicides, they're about even. So doesn't a prevalence of legally obtained guns in an area lead to higher gun violence?
Statistics say yes, but what kind of regulations would you be able to impose that would change that? Like a waiting period?
Well, yeah, and we'll get into that in a second. Now, Maddie, I want to go back to your point too, because I don't want to let you off the hook either. Someone who wants a gun, the Supreme Court has ruled that individuals have the right to carry a firearm. Someone who wants a gun for recreational purposes or hunting purposes, if you make it really difficult for them to get a gun, isn't that sort of like trying to stop them from exercising their Second Amendment right?
No, not at all. I think any regulations placed on an individual's ability to obtain a gun just respects the gravity of what kind of tool it is. I mean, we have laws for tobacco, for alcohol, driving cars. This is another area that needs regulation because of the nature of what we're talking about.
What about, let's talk like Roe v. Wade, okay, which was deemed abortions were legal.
Right.
Now there are states that are trying to pass laws that have regulations on abortion, like giving a mother an ultrasound, making her have a waiting period, making, if it's a girl who's under 18, her get parents' signatures to get the abortion. All of those are regulations on a constitutional right.
Yes.
So how is that, I mean, I assume you don't support, do you support those?
No, not those.
Okay. So then how is that different then from putting regulations on guns?
The difference there is the nature of both of those controversies. The controversy of abortion is differentiating between self and other at the point between conception and birth and how you navigate that problem. The problem with gun control, you are entirely navigating situations between yourself and other. There is no question that your actions with a gun would affect other people. Do you understand the difference?
I see the distinction you're making.
Yeah.
Carolyn, do you agree?
I do agree on that point. Yeah, guns, you are influencing other people with the gun that you purchase. And good point.
Okay. So let's talk about some mass shootings that have happened recently. In Newtown, there were 26 victims, 23 of them children. There have been shootings, mass shootings in the past, of course, as well. Virginia Tech, Fort Hood come to mind very recently. Since 1982, there have been at least 61 mass murders carried out with firearms across the country, with the killings unfolding in 30 different states, from Massachusetts to Hawaii. And in most cases, the killers had obtained their weapon legally. So what about this? Is this, I mean, does this call for reform of the way that we handle guns in America?
I think it calls for some degree of reform because most of these extremely violent crimes have been perpetrated by people who are not of a sound mind. Maybe some people suggest that you should undergo a psychological evaluation before you are able to purchase firearms, but I don't know if that goes too far because it's almost an invasion of someone's privacy. Their mental state is a private thing, but also it's super important to make sure that someone who has those kind of inclinations doesn't possess it as a weapon.
If, however, you are trying to obtain a gun which could affect other people, couldn't you say that when they try to purchase that gun, they void that right to privacy of their mental state because they're trying to purchase a deadly weapon?
Because their right to privacy is trumped by other people's right to live and exist.
Okay. Maddie, what are your thoughts?
I think that if you are attempting to obtain a weapon of deadly force, you absolutely forfeit your right to confidentiality with mental illness. I think that is absolutely necessary. And the nature of confidentiality itself, as it stands, already lends itself to this tendency. Records can be subpoenaed, and there's nothing that a clinical psychologist can do to prevent them from entering law records. Even talking to insurance companies, people have to speak about this. So the precedent is there already for this change to occur, and I think it is absolutely necessary in the future of gun control.
Okay. Now, let's move to, because mass murders certainly, terrible tragedies, get a lot of press, but what we don't normally talk about a lot, I think, is gun murder across the United States. 6 out of every 100,000 people is murdered in the United States. That's far higher than any other developed country. And the weapon of choice is handguns. Handgun murders total more than all other weapons put together as far as murders go. So, when we look at the problem, and obviously you have these mass shootings that are a huge issue, especially since they're being done with legally obtained weapons in most of the cases. What about these murders that happen every day with handguns? Should that be another reason why we need to act on the issue of guns?
It is a reason. I mean, the murder rates with guns are rather high and extremely surprising for such a developed country. But it goes back to the argument of, like, what guns should people own? Like, what guns are rational? Like, people wouldn't normally own a machine gun or an assault rifle. And handguns are kind of in that gray area because you don't normally use them for sport. They kind of just exist for self-defense. And people often use them in illegal ways like robbery and murder and like some forced action, coercion. And they're one of those points of contention between both sides. People are like, well, what are you going to use it for?
So you said handguns aren't normally used for sport, but they are used for protection.
Yes.
Do you think that there is some value in allowing people to have handguns, especially in places where law enforcement may be failing, or in situations where they feel unsafe?
Yeah, people feel a lot. An assailant is not going to confront someone with a firearm. They wouldn't want to do that when there are easier, softer targets. You feel safe and confident in yourself because you know that you can defend yourself if you're attacked. It's like having a shotgun under your bed that you can pull out if someone attacks you in the night. You feel comfortable in the fact that you are secure.
Is that worth, we've run over these statistics of mass murder, of regular murder. Is it worth that?
That's the problem. You don't know if it's worth it because while law-abiding citizens would be constrained by new rules and regulations, they wouldn't be able to defend themselves to the degree that they've become accustomed. Other individuals that are on the less scrupulous side of society would still be able to obtain those illegal firearms, or firearms in general.
Okay. What about that, Maddie?
I agree with Caroline in the sense that handguns do fall in the gray area. I think they are valuable as a protective measure with citizens because, as you said, where law enforcement isn't necessarily close by or readily available, I think it is a necessary evil, if you will. As far as the everyday murder rates go, I think that's another area where stricter regulation of licensure would help a lot because even though there are illegal weapons used in those murders, the legal weapons that are used, I think it's a matter of people not fully grasping the gravity of what they're doing, that it's a permanent solution to a temporary situation where the end-all be-all is death in that situation.
So Caroline mentioned that if we regulate guns, there will still be illegal ones out there.
Yes.
So, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, are you saying then that regulation wouldn't do any good?
I'm saying that it's a possibility that regulations would cause more harm than good, but it's just a possibility. We don't know because we haven't tried it. In places like Australia that have adopted more strict gun regulation, they took a lot of guns away from the people and actually destroyed them. And gun-related crimes actually went up because they were no longer afraid of citizens. Because the citizens wouldn't be able to protect themselves to the degree they had become accustomed to.
Do you agree with that, Mike?
I agree with what aspect exactly?
That regulations would not necessarily solve the problem because of illegal weapons.
I think they have a potential to move in either direction. I think the type of regulation is very important to consider as far as limiting the production of guns in the first place so there isn't a surplus to go into the community. And dealing with the surplus in the community, I know cities such as Buffalo, host events where people can turn in illegal, unregistered weapons with no questions asked, and they can walk away. I think events like that are important to absorb some of the illegal weapons out there. Obviously, they can't be too often, or else people would use them as a dumping site for
Right.
crime-related weapons. But I agree. I think there are always going to be illegal weapons. Even if we completely eliminated guns, people would use some type of weapon.
Yeah, and we're going to take a commercial break. What I will say is, again, when there's lots of legal weapons concentrated in one area, we do see 4 times more murders with guns. And those are legal weapons that we're talking about. All right, this is The Third Degree. I'm Sam White. We'll be right back. When we come back, we're going to be talking about what can be done, if anything, to solve our gun violence problem. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to The Third Degree. My name is Sam White. I'm here with Madeline Krautzak and Caroline Thornton. We're talking about guns, gun violence, and gun rights in the United States. One thing that I think we don't touch on so much with guns and with gun crime is the huge problem of African American young males dying at the hands of guns. The murder rate, as I talked about in the U.S., is 6 per 100,000. That's the average murder rate. But when we look among black males 18 to 24, that number is 90 per 100,000. A huge, huge portion of this black young male demographic is they're being murdered. And it's something I don't think that we as a country discuss very much. So I want both your thoughts on sort of this problem. Why we as a nation don't see it as a problem. And we'll start with Maddie.
Okay. Well, growing up in a more urban setting, I have seen a lot of this happen. I mean, you turn on the news in Buffalo any night of the week and you see someone dying of this nature. I think the reason it's not brought to light more often in the general media is it's something to be swept under the rug. People don't know what to do about it. It's scary for people not directly in the situation to think about. So if they're able to ignore it, then they do. And I think that that needs to change, because acknowledging that part of the culture will help to examine the flaws in regulations and what the steps we need to take.
Carolyn?
I agree. I think that we've developed a sort of complacency about this, like, oh, it happens, what can we do? And there are people dying every day because of that. Like Madeline said, in Buffalo, it was always on the news. In Rochester, it is always on the news. Someone is dying every single day in the city, and it's horrifying. But we accept it as fact, and we kind of tune it out because, oh, well, people get shot, gang wars. It's, yeah, it's not okay, but we accept it.
Do you think that if 90 in every 100,000 white males of the age of 18 to 24 were dying, it would be a serious issue?
Well, yes, it would be a serious issue. In order to get to that point, though, there would have to be a major shift in the culture.
Right, what I'm saying is,
yes.
is the reason that it's not an issue because these individuals are black?
I don't think it's directly because of that. I think it's because the African American culture in America slowly grew into this pattern of behavior, and it wasn't overnight, so people ignored it as it was happening in the same way we do now, because they didn't know what to do about it, they didn't know how to stop it. I think it is a problem of marginalization. That's where it's rooted in, and that is where we would have to start to change the viewpoint on it.
Yeah, a lot of these murders too happen in urban areas, and the urban areas tend to be very impoverished areas. So I think what we've been doing as a country is a young black male is murdered, we try to lock up the perpetrator. But what we ignore is the sort of the structural violence, the issues of poverty, of marginalization, like you talked about, that are sort of intrinsic to this problem. We don't try to solve the root causes of this problem. We instead try to treat it as if it is something that can be solved simply through punishment. And I think that is where sort of a lot of our problems lie, is not treating the root causes of this problem. And I don't normally state my own opinions, but I think that if 90 out of 100,000 white males ages 18 to 24 were dying every year, I think that would be one of our number one priorities. And it's unfortunate that it's not, that it is not right now. So when we come back, we will be discussing solutions to this problem, including assault weapons bans, including ammunition caps, things like that, and see which of these our panelists think would be effective and which wouldn't, and for what reasons. This is The Third Degree. I'm Sam White. Hello and welcome back to The Third Degree. My name's Sam White. I'm here with Madeline Krautsack and Carolyn Thornton. We're talking about guns, gun violence, and gun rights in the United States. And right now we're going to segue into solutions. A lot of solutions have been proposed. President Obama has issued a number of executive orders already. There's an assault weapons ban being debated right now in Congress. So let's talk about some of these solutions and whether or not you two believe that they could work. Let's start with increasing background checks. So Madeline, why don't you start us off here?
I think increasing background checks, as I stated before, is essential in moving forward with this process. I think more extensive criminal checks, mental health checks, everything of that sort is absolutely necessary when considering providing someone with a deadly weapon. I don't think there's a question about it.
Carolyn?
I agree, but the one thing that I think should be important is that there's not too much of a change in cost registration for guns as to not limit some people from certain socioeconomic backgrounds from gun ownership, because if it becomes too much of a cost to undergo all of those regulations and background checks and evaluations, it'll limit some people economically from purchasing guns.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's look at what about regulating a gun like getting a driver's license? You have to get a gun license in order to have a gun. Thoughts on that?
I mean, as far as following a paradigm for training, I think that is an excellent idea. I think it's an obvious answer to accidental firings, which are a problem, and just in general, unpredicted outcomes of shootings. I think that would be a fantastic choice.
Okay. Carolyn?
So you're saying like an evaluation of someone's competency with a firearm?
Just like with a car.
That would be a viable way to regulate and to make sure people could operate the weapon, but I don't know if it would work so well in making sure that someone was of a competent mental state to possess the weapon.
So you would want that combined with background checks?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about ammunition limits. Capping the amount of bullets that are in a cartridge. Or the amount of bullets that one can buy at one time.
That is reasonable. Obviously, if someone is skeet shooting or hunting, they're going to go through a lot more bullets than for a protective weapon. I think that might be a differentiation that some people will be able to make as far as shotgun shells versus, 30.
Like
Yeah.
like semi-automatic, automatic shells.
Yes. I agree with that. I think that there maybe should be a limit on the amount of ammunition you can possess at one time, because no one should have like an insane amount, some weird stockpile in a safe room somewhere in their house. But I don't know if it's so much how much you could have in a clip. I mean, there are insane amounts, but New York State's new regulation, I think it's 7?
7 or 9.
7 or 9?
I'm not sure which.
It actually outlawed some of the guns that already exist in New York State. They need to get new clips and new everything. But I think when we propose regulations like that, what we should first do is set up some sort of infrastructure within the state to provide that new thing, so we could use that to make new jobs while also protecting the citizens. And a lot of people feel that referendum was proposed very late at night and ratified kind of secretly, which makes them very suspicious of the government.
Mm-hmm. Which means they'll buy more guns, right?
Which means they'll buy more guns.
Okay. So then let's talk about one of the things that the NRA proposed after the Newtown massacre was arming teachers. What are our thoughts on that?
I think that is the wrong direction. If you look at the trends in school shootings, they have gone down significantly since the 1980s. And that's not to downplay any school shootings that have happened recently. I think putting more weapons in schools is fighting fire with fire in a way that will not result in any growth or protection.
Carolyn?
Yeah, I feel like not to say anything against teachers, but to have that sort of weapon in a high-stress environment like a school could possibly be dangerous, not only if the teacher loses control, but if one of the students gains access to this dangerous weapon within the classroom setting.
Mm-hmm. Another thing they proposed was armed guards. How do you feel about that?
It's almost escalating the violence that might already be innate in that environment, because it's taking like what would be fisticuffs to a level where someone possesses a highly dangerous weapon.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You agree?
I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. So the last solution that we're going to talk about is a ban on private ownership of guns. So let's forget the Heller case, the Second Amendment. Just say hypothetically, if you could ban private ownership of guns, would you and why?
I think if there was no resistance to the idea, then it would be feasible to ban private ownership of guns. I think the backlash that it would create in the community would be detrimental to the central government functioning in the United States.
So your problem is not with the idea itself, your problem was with the feasibility.
Yes.
So you do think that if it were feasible,
Yes.
banning guns is the right way to go. Private ownership of guns.
It is definitely a competitive option. The only issue that I have with it is the fact that there would still be illegal guns on the streets, and that would leave private citizens without a way to protect themselves. And if criminals knew that people most likely would not have guns, if most people were law-abiding, that would leave them more tempted to armed robberies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think...
Is that not what the police force is for?
Well, yes, but if someone walks into your house, the response time of the police can vary greatly depending on the demands on the department and the geographical area. So,
Okay. Carolyn, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that if we were to eliminate private ownership of guns, the people would not only feel less safe, but they would be less safe. And the problem isn't that we should have guns innately. The problem is people have guns, so we have to have guns in order to protect ourselves from those guns. It's like, oh, they have a stick, well, we need a stick. But it's become to that level.
Okay. So last thing I want to talk to you guys about before we go to our last commercial break, and then we'll come back, we'll do our A's and F's for this episode, is the proposal in Congress right now, an assault weapons ban, meeting with a lot of resistance in Congress. Banning assault weapons, yes or no? Yes?
yes, absolutely yes. Even if you're talking about protection, there is no reason for anyone to own a gun designed specifically to kill people. When you're talking about having a handgun for protection, you can disable people to the point that they can't harm you. I do not believe anyone has the right to decide absolutely to take someone's life.
Carolyn?
I think we should define assault weapons better in Congress before we ban them.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now the definition is very loose and involves a bunch of different terms that are like military attachments, which can be pistol grips, or extended cartridges, or certain modifications on the gun. And that doesn't make it as, like, to the point where people are imagining, like, oh, he has an AK-47. It's just a shotgun with a rifle attachment. It's stuff like that we need to sit down and define what assault weapons are, so a consensus can be made, and then.
Well, let's say just for the sake of debate, what if they said handguns are okay, hunting rifles are okay? That's it.
I mean, that's reasonable.
Okay. Shotguns would not be included on that. But that's reasonable, you'd say?
It's more reasonable than an outright ban. But,
okay.
I mean, I honestly don't know. I'm not a government official.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, when we come back, we will give our A's and F's out for this week. You're watching The Third Degree here on GSTV. Hello, welcome back to The Third Degree. My name's Sam White. We are closing out our episode here on guns and gun violence in the United States. But before we go, we have to give out our A's and F's. So, Madeline, would you like to start us off?
I would like to give an A to the increased thought and discussion on gun control that has recently cropped up in American culture. I think it's an important aspect of life that should be paid more attention to, so that's good. And I would give an F to the fear-mongering tactics of the NRA, making claims like we mentioned before, like you will take my gun from my cold dead hands, treating gun control as a categorical topic, which limits discussion and pits sides against each other instead of working for compromise.
Okay. Carolyn?
I'm going to give an A to the writers of Downton Abbey because this past week's episode is awesome.
Okay.
And an F to the police handling of the, what's his name? The shooter guy. The Dormer case because they have harassed a bunch of innocent citizens in pursuing this man.
All right. My A goes to Pope Benedict for stepping down. I think that more should do that when they reach a time where they begin to go senile. And my F goes to the Catholic Church if they don't pick a woman as the next pope. All right. This is The Third Degree. I'm Sam White. Thank you, Carolyn and Madeline, for being here. Thank you all out there for watching here on GSTV. GSTV4. Turn us on. Good night, everybody.